to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we read from 2 Chronicles chapter 28. And Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the eyes of Yahweh as his father David had done, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made metal images for the Baals, and he made offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burned his sons as an offering, according to the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and made offerings on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Therefore Yahweh his God gave him into the hand of the king of Syria, who defeated him and took captive a great number of his people and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hand of the king of Israel, who struck him with great force. For Pekah, the son of Remaliah, killed 120,000 from Judah in one day, all of them men of valor, because they had forsaken Yahweh, the God of their fathers. And Zikri, a mighty man of Ephraim, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, and Azrikam, the commander of the palace, and Elkanah, the next in authority to the king. The men of Israel took captive 200,000 of their relatives, women, sons, and daughters. They also took much spoil from them and brought the spoil to Samaria. But a prophet of Yahweh was there, whose name was Oded. And he went out to meet the army that came to Samaria, and said to him, Behold, because Yahweh the God of your fathers was angry with Judah, he gave them into your hand. But you have killed them in a rage that has reached up to heaven, and now you intend to subjugate the people of Judah and Jerusalem, male and female, as your slaves. Have you not sins of your own against Yahweh your God? Now hear me, and send back the captives from your relatives whom you have taken, for the fierce wrath of Yahweh is upon you. Certain chiefs also of the men of Ephraim, Azariah the son of Johanan, Berechiah the son of Meshillemoth, Jehizkiah the son of Shallum, and Amasa the son of Hadlai, stood up against those who were coming from the war, and said to them, You shall not bring the captives in here, for you propose to bring upon us guilt against Yahweh in addition to our present sins and guilt. For our guilt is already great, and there is fierce wrath against Israel. So the armed men left the captives and the spoil before the princes and all the assembly, and the men who have been mentioned by name rose and took the captives, and with the spoil they clothed all who were naked among them. They clothed them, gave them sandals, provided them with food and drink, and anointed them. And carrying all the feeble among them on donkeys, they brought them to their kinsfolk at Jericho, the city of palm trees. Then they returned to Samaria. At that time King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help, for the Edomites had again invaded and defeated Judah and carried away captives, and the Philistines had made raids on the cities in the Shephelah and the Negev of Judah, and had taken Bethshemesh, Aijalon, Gederoth, Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages, and they had settled there. For Yahweh humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had made Judah act sinfully, and had been very unfaithful to Yahweh. So Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came against him, and afflicted him instead of strengthening him. For Ahaz took a portion from the house of Yahweh, and the house of the king, and of the princes, and gave tribute to the king of Assyria. But it did not help him. In the time of his distress he became yet more faithless to Yahweh, this same King Ahaz. For he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus that had defeated him, and said, Because the gods of the kings of Syria help them, I will sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. And Ahaz gathered together the vessels of the house of God, and cut in pieces the vessels of the house of God. And he shut up the doors of the house of Yahweh, and he made himself altars in every corner of Jerusalem. In every city of Judah he made high places to make offerings to other gods, provoking to anger Yahweh the God of his fathers. Now the rest of his acts and all his ways from first to last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. And Ahaz slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, for they did not bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son reigned in his place. This is the word of the Lord. So King Ahaz is described as being among perhaps the most wicked kings in all of Israel's history, well, Judah's history, the southern kingdom. That brings us up to 6 kings who have done right in the eyes of Yahweh, and then 4 kings who have done evil in the eyes of Yahweh, plus Abijah. So he's 20 years old when he takes over from his father Jotham, who had been a faithful king, and he reigns 16 years. That's going to be roughly 732 to 716 BC for his reign, which means that during his reign actually is when the city of Samaria, capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, will fall to the Assyrians. That's not mentioned in this text because our focus here has been on Judah. Our focus in the book of Chronicles being on Judah and her kings because that's where the temple is. The temple is where God is. It's where he has promised to be among his people. We're focusing on the worship life. We're focusing on the promises of God. So that's the reason the chronicler has taken us in the direction that he has. He instead, not following David's ways, he walks in the ways of the kings of Israel, like Jeroboam. Every king of Israel in the book of Kings is described as doing evil in the eyes of Yahweh, following after the sins of Jeroboam, that is, making golden calves in Bethel and Dan, northern and southern cities, for the people to worship instead of worshiping Yahweh at the temple in Jerusalem. Ahaz takes that further. He's going to make metal images to the Baals for his people to worship, and we're going to see this progress as the chapter goes. So he makes metal statues of false gods to have people worship them. Then, personally, he makes offerings in the valley of the son of Hinnom, burning his sons. Child sacrifice. According to the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel. So one of the previous tribes that had lived in the promised land. So you've got the Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Hittites, Jebusites, Girgashites, so forth. The Canaanites, in particular, were one of those groups that practiced child sacrifice. There are 2 gods that I can think of, 2 false gods in the Old Testament, that as part of the worship of the people, as they worshipped their false gods, they were supposed to do child sacrifices. And one of them would be the Canaanites. The false gods, by the way, are called Molech, M-O-L-E-C-H, and Chemosh, C-H-E-M-O-S-H. Those are the 2 false gods who have these practices of child sacrifice. Now, the valley of the son of Hinnom is going to be a valley to the south of Jerusalem, and you likely don't know it by this name unless you've been tuning into the podcast or you simply have enjoyed reading your Old Testament quite a bit. You most likely know this location by the name Jesus calls it in the New Testament a couple of times. Gehenna, G-E-H-E-N-N-A. You can see the connection between Hinnom and Gehenna as words. So you've got the H in English, it's a little different. You got H-I-N-N, and Gehenna, you have H-E-N-N. That's the Hebrew word Hinnom coming into Greek as Gehenna, and both of them then being brought into English. So it's not as pretty as it could be, but the valley of the son of Hinnom is the Gehenna that Jesus is going to reference, and at the time Jesus uses it, the people essentially thought of it as being like hell. I mean, it had that kind of a reputation. You didn't want to go there. You didn't want to be there because of this, because they recognized the history of what the people had done in that place. And to go into a place where someone has died makes you unclean. So if somebody's just died in a tent, you go into the tent, you're unclean. Jewish practice would take that further in homes. If a home had been built, well, let's put it this way. Jews did not enter the homes of Gentiles by their own law, because there might be it might be an unclean house. I mean, one of the practices of some of the Gentile peoples was to actually kill a child and bury that child as by their own false religion, a means of achieving a blessing for their home. And so if that's been done, that home is unclean for the Jewish people, and they don't go there. Anyway, that's a bit of a connection point. So they didn't go to the valley of Hinnom or the valley of Gehenna because of this history. So that's something worth connecting with. Ahaz also, he does pagan worship plentifully. So the idea of under every green tree is the plentifulness, right? And then that he's making offerings and sacrifices on the high places and the hills is a reference to pagan worship practices. The higher up you are, the closer to God you must be, which isn't really true, but that's the way a lot of ancient religions have looked at it. And honestly, a lot of Christians look at it that way still today too, but not really the case. So high places, very much connected to pagan worship. Therefore, verse 5, Yahweh gave him into the hand of the king of Syria and to the hand of the king of Israel. Now, before you go too far into this, even now, even after all of this, even after his paganism has taken over, how did God treat Ahaz before this? What did God offer to King Ahaz? How did he offer to help him? This is not recorded in the text here for us, but that's a question I want you to focus on with your children, because it's going to take you, the answer is going to take you down a very well-known path. It's going to take you to Isaiah chapter 7, which begins with, in the days of Ahaz, son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin the king of Syria, and Pekah the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it. But if you read that section, you see God send the prophet Isaiah to King Ahaz and to offer him a sign, anything he wants, for God to prove to Ahaz that he is God and that he will fight for him, that he can care for his people. And the sign can be as high as heaven or as low as Sheol, which is basically the burial ground. So you bury 6 feet under, as we would think of it today. So buried into the earth. And Ahaz refuses. And so God responds by giving Ahaz a sign himself. And he says, "Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." So this promise, Isaiah 7:14, of a virgin birth, is one that we know because Matthew picks up on it in his gospel, is about Jesus. Isaiah chapter 7, verses 1 through 17, are a good read to parallel this chapter. Because what we see there, and it ends, verse 17, with God giving Ahaz into the hands of the king of Assyria. And so we see Pekah, and we see also the king of Syria and the king of Assyria all fighting against Ahaz in this chapter. And so to give a bit of a short summary here of the next few paragraphs, again, Yahweh is giving Ahaz into the hand of his enemies. So he gives him over to the king of Syria and to the king of Israel, both of whom, so these are named, by the way, Rezin, king of Syria, Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, in Isaiah 7. These kings come against him, they defeat him, so they capture his people, they take his stuff. Lots of evil, lots of loss for Ahaz, for the nation of Judah in the midst of this. And Zikri, a mighty man of Ephraim, so it's part of Israel, kills one of the king's sons. He kills his palace commander, so the head of his house, and he kills the next in authority to the king, Elkanah, so the closest in command. He kills 3 of the most prominent men in the kingdom. 120,000 soldiers, all men of valor, dead. Why? Because they had forsaken Yahweh. Israel takes captive 200,000 plus a bunch of spoil. This gets 2 paragraphs dedicated to it really here, as we see both a prophet stand against this and some of the chiefs of Ephraim, again, part of Israel. So you've got the Israelite army having 200,000 captives and a bunch of spoil from defeating Judah, and they're bringing it home. They're bringing it back to Samaria, and amongst them, some of their own chiefs, some of their own leaders among the people, and also one of the prophets, a prophet of Yahweh. So even in this time of unfaithfulness in Israel, where Israel's about to fall, it's not that God has not sent his word to them. Here there is in Israel, the northern kingdom, which within 10 years' time will be destroyed. Here there is a prophet who speaks God's word, and he's also going to oppose this idea of these people. So the prophet's argument is that God has given Judah into your hands because he was angry with them. But now you have taken it too far. You have gone above and beyond. You have not just been God's instrument to punish Judah, but you have reveled in it. You've enjoyed it. You have thirsted for their blood, and now you seek to make them your slaves. Essentially, this is not what God has given you to do. You've gone too far. You're making this sin against God. You're bringing this guilt upon all of Israel. Have you not sins of your own against Yahweh your God? So God was angry with the sins of Judah, and he punished them. You already have sins against God that he is rightly angry against. Why make him more angry and possibly bring about the same thing that just happened to Judah? That's Oded's point. And the chiefs make a similar argument that they shall not bring in their captives because they already have this guilt. Our guilt is already great, and this would only add to that guilt. And so the armed men listen. The soldiers of Israel listen, and they don't take the spoils and the captives any further. They leave them with the chiefs there. They leave them with the assembly. Those named men, all those names in verse 12, those men then care for the 200,000 captives. They clothe them, they give them food and drink, and they send them home. I skipped one there. They anointed them. This is an odd one. You anoint a prophet, priest, or king. You anoint someone to be set apart. So a couple of possible thoughts here on why they anointed them. They're setting them apart, marking them as no longer ordinary people. These were taken as captive. They're being sent home. I think that connects to the other possibility too, which is simply that they're seeking to atone for themselves. They're hoping that by sending these people home, they have covered their guilt, they have covered their shame, they have covered the wrong that's been done. I think those two things go together a little bit, have some overlap, but that's likely the reason for what they're doing. They send them back to Jericho, the city of palm trees. At that time, verse 16, King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help. Here's another family question. Where should Ahaz have gone for help? This is just like the Isaiah 7 text. He should have asked Yahweh, for help, and instead he does not. He could have asked Yahweh in Isaiah 7 to defeat Syria and Israel, the enemies he feared, but he didn't. He trusts only in the ways of this. Well, I can't even say he only trusts in the ways of this world, because we're going to see he offers sacrifices to false gods. He simply has a hardened heart that refuses to trust in Yahweh at all, period. And there are many in this world today who are the same. So he goes to the king of Assyria for help because the Edomites and the Philistines have been fighting against him, capturing his people, capturing his villages, living in his land. So the Edomites are off to the south of the Salt Sea, to the southeast of Judah. The Philistines are off to the west, southwest of Judah, pinned between Judah and the Mediterranean Sea. So Yahweh had humbled Judah because of King Ahaz, because he had made Judah act sinfully, making them worship false gods. He had been unfaithful to Yahweh. So, verse 20 and 21, Ahaz does all this. He asks for help from Assyria, but instead of receiving help, he is destroyed. He's conquered. Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, comes against him with violence and afflicts him instead of strengthening him, as it says in verse 20. Ahaz takes from the house of God, from the temple, and even from his palace, and gives tribute to the king of Assyria, seeking his favor again, but it still doesn't help. Why? Because God is judging King Ahaz. Then, verse 22, in the time of distress, he became yet more faithless to Yahweh. So instead of turning and repenting, he continues in his idolatry. He believes the gods of Damascus, the gods of Syria, saved them against me. Maybe they'll do the same for me. So he offers to them, but they were the ruin of him. So he takes all the vessels from the house of God. He breaks them. He tears them down. He bars the doors to the house. He shut up the doors to the temple so no one could enter. And then instead he builds all over Jerusalem, all over the cities of Judah, these high places, these altars to sacrifice and to worship false gods, provoking Yahweh to anger. Ahaz dies. He's buried in the city of Jerusalem, but not in the tombs of the kings. And instead, Hezekiah, his son, will reign in his place. So he burned some of his sons. One of his sons was killed by Pekah, king of Israel, but not all of his sons. Hezekiah, perhaps a connection to Isaiah 7, but that's a long story already, a long episode. Hezekiah lives, and Hezekiah is the one God will make king next over his people, Judah, and he will be very unlike his father.